My name is Sophia Sahanik, and I'm the Director of Training and Development at Philanthropy Impact, and I'm also today the moderator. On behalf of Philanthropy Impact, thank you all for coming and welcome to the second of our Walk in My Shoes web series. We have set up this series of chats to connect with our members because we're not able to do our face-to-face events, but also to be a support during an unprecedented time of confusion when all our professional and personal lives have collided, and when philanthropy and social investment is more important than ever. Here at Philanthropy Impact, we want to create a space of ideas sharing, of collaboration and solidarity for our members and also for our wider network. Today we're coming together to discuss the importance of values at this time, particularly in decision making, in client relationships, but also for charities, for philanthropists, social investors. I want to say thank you to our board members, Ceris Gardner of Maurice Turnor Gardner, and our board member Eddie Finch of Buzzacott, and also our member John Canady of the National Philanthropic Trust UK for giving their time and also their candour today. We are immensely grateful to you all. Thank you very much. Usually at our events I have to give rules of engagement, but it's hard to do Chatham House rules when we're recording this and putting it out live on web. But I will ask that you remain respectful to each other and to the discussion, and please don't use this time to pitch. It's a strictly 30-minute session, and we hope to be able to include some questions from the audience through the Q&A and through the chat function, which I will be helping Ceris to manage. But please know that if you're unable to get any questions answered today, we will try to answer them offline, and we'll also be hoping that they will help us shape upcoming topics that are of interest to you all. As the web series develops, we hope that it will become more and more interactive. And that leads me to hand over to Ceris.
Well, just before you do,
sorry, John wants to step in.
Sorry, just before you do, Sophie, I sent you an email from someone who's having trouble linking in.
Okay, I'll deal with that. Thank you, John.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Ceris.
Not a problem at all. Thanks everybody for joining us. Welcome to the second in the series of Walk in My Shoes. And thank you very much to John Canady and Eddie Finch for joining me on the panel today. I hope that we're coming through loud and clear. I'm probably the only one who is IT deficient amongst the panel members, at least. So I put my hand up now before you say, what an idiot. But thank you very much again for joining us. The purpose of today's talk, as you heard from Sophia, is whether we should be thinking more now about values-based philanthropy. And I have to say that because there's so many definitions thrown around or words thrown around in relation to philanthropy, I had to look this up myself to see what we mean by values-based philanthropy. And basically, I think the simplest way of describing it is the process of identifying why we give and why we give to particular causes rather than how we give. And this is a dilemma for me in a sense, because as a lawyer rather than a charity advisor or an expert in terms of charitable causes, for me, I'm always looking to help clients with how they give. And it's not quite so often that they come to me to talk about why they give. So it'd be very interesting to hear what John and Eddie's experiences are in that particular field as we go through today. So enough talk from me, because I am supposed to be, not quite the silent member of the panel, but guiding everybody else through what they, I hope, will be prepared to talk about. John, how are you finding that your life at your donor advised fund, NPT UK, and Transatlantic for that matter, it has been affected by the crisis we're all in at the moment?
Thank you, Ceris. We've had two of our busiest weeks since we have set up a donor advised fund in the UK over 5 years ago, in the past 2 weeks since the pandemic really started, both in terms of new donors setting up donor advised funds, thinking about philanthropy in a serious way for the first time, as well as making grants out to charities. A real uptick in the grants going out to charities as well, because naturally people are responding to the need that's in everyone's face right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Eddie, what about you? Are you seeing any similar signs amongst your client base?
It's been a really mixed picture. I mean, I think my perspectives may be slightly different because I spend much more time working with charities and social enterprises than philanthropists as a balance. But some of our smaller family type charities absolutely are looking at dropping business as usual for now and really finding ways to support as creatively as they can. I think, interestingly, we've got people like Access, the Social Investment Foundation that we work with, and they are looking very much at the fact that they're not really affected massively by the crisis themselves because they can carry on working remotely from home or whatever. But what they really want to do is make sure that they look to support the people at the end of their chain as best they can, which I guess is the same as what John's finding, that people want to find creative ways of getting money quickly through. But one of the big themes that came through last week was around information sharing and knowledge sharing. And I think one of the biggest challenges we've all got, because this is still the first couple of weeks, is making sure that everybody knows what each other are thinking. Because I think there's a lot of people trying to set up initiatives to get money moving, a lot of charities and social businesses that are maybe struggling a bit. But I'm not sure the link between the two groups has fully formed yet. I know not many of my charity clients seem to be aware that philanthropists and social investors are looking to rally resources, for example. So it's tough times. But I think the key thing for philanthropists maybe to think about is that the need's not very evenly spread across the sector. A lot of charities are like a lot of businesses. They're just doing the same as they usually do at home, whereas some are in crisis mode already. So I think finding the people who need the money most is probably job number one.
Mm-hmm. Ceris, could I build on that a little bit with what we're seeing in the types of grants that people are giving out? So again, we work with philanthropists, so it's the donor's perspective that we see. There's a natural sort of bucket of grants that are going out in direct response to the crisis. And so this is funding vaccine research, the public health response of transporting goods to the front lines in the NHS and in other parts of the world. Those types of initiatives are really the top of mind for people. But then there's also something that, if you think about it, it makes sense. There's a real push for food insecurity and helping charities that are really working on food insecurity, both in the obvious ways and then in some of the less obvious ways. People are thinking very creatively about it. For example, we had one donor who, you may know, in the Premier League, they sometimes collect food for food banks during match day games and things. Well, those things aren't happening anymore. So we had one donor that is aware of that and made a grant to a food bank to make up for what that food bank charity was losing out by not having the collections at the Premier League game days. So there's a whole trickle down of negative effects going through the charitable sector that folks are thinking through and how to help in those ways. And then there's also a lot of work just going into general support, but still with a link to the COVID virus, in the sense of there was another grant that went out to help school children that are now at home that need online access, but if they're disadvantaged and don't have online access, they can't get in to do the schoolwork that they need to do. Again, all precipitated by the virus. So general things like that on how they can do some general support across a wide spectrum of causes.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting because in a way that's a practical demonstration of values-based philanthropy, in my view, identifying those types of causes where it's needed most, and that appeals to the individual philanthropists, whatever is closest to their hearts, I'm guessing, is how they are looking at it in terms of who they're choosing to support.
I think that's right. And one other thing that's not maybe obvious, but I do think it goes back to values-based philanthropy, depending on your own personal value framework. Giving anonymously is sometimes important for folks, specifically in crisis. I'm not trying to take glory for something. I want to give anonymously. And of course, in donor advised funds, you can do that. And so it's just an interesting dynamic that sometimes people want to be very supportive, maybe even ramp up their funding for good causes, but take the spotlight off of them and let it remain on the causes and the needs that it needs.
Yeah. Picking up on Eddie's point about a mixed picture, I'm definitely seeing a mixed picture because I'm seeing people saying that, or feeling, shall we say, that their personal wealth has suffered a dramatic reduction, particularly if they've been invested in the stock market, for example, that they're worried about their businesses failing and businesses around them failing. They're worried about, closing down businesses, how they look after their employees, not just safety-wise, which is obviously a major factor at the moment, but also in terms of longer-term employment. One thing, of course, the health. So health and well-being is a big factor for everybody in terms of individuals as well as the wider society. But interestingly, and I would say this, wouldn't I? Professional advice at this stage is vital because, for example, clients are suddenly starting to think much more about their own mortality. And although it's not a direct lifetime giving point, they are looking much more closely now at getting their wills in place, updated, and I'm seeing more of a charity focus in terms of the legacies they want to leave. Only problem is, it's not focusing on the immediate crisis. And so my job, I think, is partly to try and see whether they would be willing to bring those donations forward so that it's helpful now and they can see the effect that their gifts are having, rather than maybe 10-20 years down the line when goodness knows what position the world will be in. So it's an interesting one. I'm seeing the same type of mixed bag of reaction, to be honest, amongst different people.
I think another thing that's maybe philanthropists can look at, and like big grant-making foundations and public authorities, is maybe just being a bit more relaxed about some of the expectations they would normally have about how people use money they've already been given. Because there may be charities that are suffering big cash flow problems, that have got restricted funding, and maybe just being a bit more understanding if they want to dip into that money to keep the boat afloat rather than for the projects it was given for would be a useful thing at the moment. So I think there's a lot to do with big, broad-shouldered organisations, maybe just watching out for the interests of the smaller organisations around them.
Actually, picking up on that point, I was reading something this afternoon from New Philanthropy Capital, where they sent something around literally only today, talking about that very point about how philanthropists who might until now have been putting quite restrictive requirements on the charities to whom they donate, and suggesting that actually a bit more flexibility wouldn't go amiss at this time, because why. The previous way of making sure that the money was spent in a particular way and it was properly accounted for, and every penny was the impact of every penny was reported back. Maybe that ought to be, and obviously not lifted in every sense, but somehow a little bit more of a flexible approach to that type of restrictive donation that philanthropists have got used to, really, because of the need to show and know that their money is being put to good use. But a bit more of the trust needs to come back, perhaps, at this stage.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Alana last week said that people shouldn't think anything goes, and I think as an auditor I need to be very careful what I say here, but certainly I was talking with a group of people who run big social businesses that are public sector funded, and they're really worried about not being able to meet the outcome requirements of a lot of their funding, so whether they'd be strictly entitled to the money. One of those chief executives, I think his approach was very wise, and again, as an auditor I can't recommend it wholeheartedly, but it was really do the right thing and ask to be forgiven afterwards if you're in any doubt at the moment.
Yes, exactly.
With the donors, I was just to confirm your point. With the donors that we work with, they increasingly will give unrestricted funds during a crisis like this, to precisely address your point, to take off the conditions and the administration that requires as well on the charity side, to fill out all of the forms to say how they're going to spend it. In an extreme crisis like that, we encourage, and they often do, just provide an unrestricted grant to a charity that's doing good work on the front lines.
That's good. That's good to see it's actually coming through in that way, actually on the ground. What about the role of government in all of this? What's your sort of take on whether the government is doing enough, doing anything, whether it should be doing more? What, John? What do you think? Do you have any sort of feel for that area?
From the philanthropist and the donor's perspective, I think there is a real appetite to find good government initiatives that they can collaborate with. And often it's, it's sometimes just the philanthropic money going into a government-sponsored project, or also linking private sector, government, and nonprofit sector all together in different projects. And there are different, examples around the world right now with the World Health Organization, with other groups. Gates Foundation is reaching out to the private sector and individual philanthropists to co-fund some of their, to attract capital to some of their COVID response funds. So I think there is that desire, but in the time of crisis and things changing so quickly, if you are a philanthropist, it's sometimes hard to find the right initiative that is a good cause and a good investment of your money. So it's a challenge for philanthropists and the advisors that help them to try to direct them to the right places in this environment. But it's definitely out there, and I think that's the future of collaboration, cross-sector collaboration. Yeah, no, I quite agree with that. Eddie, have you heard any thoughts on whether the government should be doing more, or how the government is helping here?
Yeah, I think because certainly a lot of the initiatives that are badged as being support to business are equally helpful to a lot of charity clients, if they're employers, if they're operating retail premises, those kind of things. But of course, a lot of charities aren't working in those circumstances. They're working with volunteers, etc. And I think we're encouraging people to look at the government relief that's out there, that's mainstream for business, but bearing in mind that it's effectively a very soft lending arrangement, most of it. I mean, there's very little of it is actually, the wage relief scheme is the only one that's really an actual subsidy. But I know I was contacted by Institute of Fundraising earlier today that the charity sector is looking at trying to get government to do more for the charities that will operate in ways that aren't as similar to business. And we'll be making a case, because I think some of the charities that don't operate out of retail premises don't necessarily have large staff, but still need to operate in these circumstances, could do with more help from government and maybe more imaginative relief.
Yes, and of course, particularly the charities that are doing the work of government under contract in so many respects, they surely would need to have more funding at this point than they've had to date. Because if you remember, we're quite often, aren't we, talking at Philanthropy Impact about the inadequacy in many cases of the funding they receive to carry out the contractual commitments they take on. So now would really be the time for the government to step up and put major financial improvements into those contracts, I would suggest.
Absolutely, yeah. There's also they're all on such thin margins. Sorry, John, and they've got very, very weak is the wrong word for it. They're charity balance sheets. They don't carry reserves, so they're operating in a way in which a sort of puff of wind can blow them out. So any initiatives to give them more long-term reserve type funding, more leeway on contracts. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
Sorry, John.
No, just one other transatlantic point related to what government does, not to say that that's what needs to happen here, but it's interesting that the U.S. is increasing incentives for charitable relief, at least in a temporary way during the COVID virus, in terms of raising the thresholds of how much of your income you can write off, and these different, also making it easier for people that don't itemize their tax return to take a charitable deduction in the U.S. They have, in spite of the massive government spending, which means there's very little money to go around, of course, and that happens here as well, they are trying to incentivize individual philanthropists to give more during this crisis.
That's very good. Yeah, I'm impressed. Maybe now's our chance to get all these other gift aid improvements, etc., that we've been lobbying for through the government at this stage. Somehow I doubt it, but you never know. Sorry, yes.
Could I just mention something, Ceris?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there is a joint letter to philanthropists that was in the Financial Times that a number of organizations have signed, including New Philanthropy Capital and the Association of Charitable Foundations, ourselves, and some others. Yeah, I think it would be good for people to go and take a look at that. It'll be on our site tomorrow, but you can also go to New Philanthropy Capital site to actually join in, and that would be the fastest way to get your name on that letter.
Excellent. Yes, I have read it. You sent it around earlier, didn't you?
Yeah.
to us. Yeah, it's worth, it's definitely worth the read. So that's really helpful. Thanks, John. In terms of what else are we seeing out there? Going back to what we were supposed to be talking about is values-based philanthropy. To me, it seems that the values are coming through in everything that the philanthropists are looking at doing at the moment, in terms of trying to help alleviate, where they can, the worst effects of this crisis that we're all living through. Is there anything else that you can think of in terms of values-based that you would want to just raise at this point? John, John Pepin, would you like to say anything on that? Because you've probably got your own ideas, I'm sure.
Thanks for the warning. I'm just supposed to be another pretty face sitting here watching. I think there's a number of issues that have to be taken into consideration. So it's good that a lot of people are starting to look at giving, but there's a major issue about how to do that and how to live and affect their values. Professional advisors have I think, a key role in supporting that. If you think in terms of not just understanding what the values are, but what's the money mean to them? What are their life goals? How their families are going to be involved? These are all key questions that professional advisors can be helping, especially for a lot of wealthy people who are looking at philanthropy in a major way for the first time. Mm-hmm. The other issue, I think, is that there are so many different causes to get involved with. And again, New Philanthropy Capital has been doing some really great work on this, but they have on their site a breakdown of about 11 or 12 different areas, and then go into detail about those. So that helps as well. And on our side is sort of how you might become strategic in this area. So those are some of the issues. But if you think in terms, okay, I've expressed my values, I know what I sort of would like to do, but how am I going to do that? Well, there are so many different approaches. So you can just give your money away to other organizations to give it for you. You can get involved in what we're talking about now, which is values-based philanthropy, or strategic philanthropy, maybe in conjunction with that. But there's other approaches. So, for example, Isa Bosch in Germany has taken a really interesting approach around transformative philanthropy. So there's all this jargon. Even if I've never done this before, I've got to learn all this jargon and stuff. It's really interesting. But her approach is basically to work with the recipients, trust the recipients, develop the projects together, and keep bureaucracy down to a minimum, because it is difficult in many cases. It takes a lot of time and energy to not only fill out applications, but also to report on them. And Marcel Speller is doing some really brilliant work in that area to simplify processes that I hope foundations and trusts start to adopt. Then there's stuff that Dame Stephanie Shirley has been doing, which is around entrepreneurial philanthropy or emergent philanthropy, whatever term you want to use. And her approach has been really neat in the sense that she has an area where there might not be a solution. And then she, because she was one of the first women IT entrepreneurs in the country a long time ago, she uses those skill sets to actually look at, develop solutions, test them out, and some might work and some might not work, and then from there move it forward. But she also uses a venture philanthropy model, which is to get involved. A really neat thing is getting involved but not controlling. So there's a whole range of different approaches that someone who's just getting into this is going to face, and I think professional advisors are key to solving that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I'm not sure which branch of the professional advisors. Probably more likely to be the charity advisors rather than the advisors to philanthropists rather than the lawyers and accountants, dare I say. It's quite rare that we get asked about charitable causes, as you know from previous conversations we've had. But I think this is a time when actually we could be and should be raising these questions, because going back to what you were saying, speed of delivery is absolutely essential now. And I don't know whether anybody else has got this impression, but we've been in lockdown for a week now. My impression is that things are only just starting to ramp up. And I think over the coming weeks, we'll see a lot more activity, and probably, I hope, philanthropists stepping up to the plate to do their part. But that's just my stance at the moment, because last week was quite quiet. As I said earlier, a bit of a mixed bag. And I just think that maybe as things pick up now, the next coming weeks, we'll see a lot more help being given speedily to the charities that need it and the social enterprises that need it. That's my hope anyway.
Ceris, there's a question that's come in through the chat from George King. He wanted to see if anyone knows of a place that is compiling a list of organizations and donor options for people who want to help to fund aid. Does anyone have any, John, do you have any sense of who's pulling that together?
Yes, I think there are great examples all around of resources being put together. As a donor advice fund, we're neutral, so we help people get to wherever they wish to give to. But in an unprecedented move, we've put together on our website for our donors and anybody else a COVID resources page to start to collate this. And it even directs to other sites that are also good resources. So it's not about us trying to promote ourselves or sell ourselves. It's just giving a resource for people. You mentioned New Philanthropic Capital. There are other great resources out there as well. And so that's a work in progress for us to try to compile things in one place and try to get the best thinking from around.
I know the social investors are doing something similar too, and my mind's temporarily lost the name of the site that they've put together collaboratively, but they've got resources for people who are current investees and who might be looking for short-term support, because a lot of them do grants plus lending.
Well, it's interesting because another person, Edward Thomas, who suggested that there's a place called actionagainstcorona.org. So that may be another source. We'll compile all these later.
John, I might add that I see Donzi has noted that Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors also has a list on their site, as I'm sure many of those of us in the intermediary advisory space do as well. So yes.
I find it intriguing though, because we've got a small group meeting coming up later this week, because we were talking to a funder who was being approached by a lot of funders who are seeking money for their funds, and it was like multiple approaches. And so that person was really quite concerned, and so we're trying to get everyone together to sort of say, okay, let's look at joint activities, let's look at co-investment, and Beacon Collaborative, of course, is working on that to achieve those kinds of things as well.
I think, John, that's going to be so important, though, because everybody spent most of last week getting their own coronavirus resource page up and working out how the heck to work remotely. So now that everybody's started to talk to each other again, I think that coordinating is going to be so important, that people aren't duplicating efforts. So anything we can do to make sure people are only doing things once will be brilliant.
Well, like John was saying, I think from our perspective, we're cause neutral. And so when we approach people, we're not asking for money, but unless it's, of course, our trustees. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. So it's, I think it's important that people get together to coordinate. And there's so many different good causes. Again, going back to what is on the New Philanthropy Capital site, it's very complex, very difficult. London has come together to create a massive fund, and there's other funds that community foundations are doing across the UK. So it's important to plug into a lot of that as opposed to just duplicating.
And we've only got a couple of minutes left, I've just been warned. So just to wrap up, Eddie, did you want to make any final wrapping up comments?
No, I think only a simple observation that the ramifications of this as it spreads into more of Africa, for example, are going to get bigger. And we're finding that in places, I think John mentioned earlier, where people haven't got access to the internet in their own homes, things are going to be even tougher. So I think, assuming it's the same in all parts of the world as it is for us in our little back rooms or whatever is not right. We need to think more creatively about some of those other places too.
Yeah, that makes sense. John, what about you? Anything just to wrap up? Final comments?
I think our headline from our perspective is often, because this is a global crisis, you have to think globally, but often acting locally, because it's the local charities and the local good causes that you can most directly connect with. And then, as was mentioned, the other summary point is to give unrestricted gifts. Now is not the time to put too many ties on a gifts. And of course, because we're a donor advised fund, think about giving all types of assets. You may have things other than cash that you can turn into philanthropic capital, shares, property, other things that you could give away and turn into good causes in this time.
Yeah, I totally endorse what you've both said. John Pepin, did you want to wrap up with anything on your side?
Well, I've run charities through 2 recessions in Canada. One was very high inflation, and it's a difficult time for charities, but I managed to grow them, and it's a real opportunity time to create new things. So all the stuff that's happening, like these Zoom calls, people interacting, are really important to do that. Also, we should be open to being really creative and encouraging the government to be more creative. So there's a lot of talk about universal basic income now as a way of dealing with poverty. But we shouldn't forget that many, many charities are going to struggle through this, and also many, many families who are close to the line and then lose their jobs. They're going to really struggle, and we have to find ways to reach out to them to help. And you have groups like UK Community Foundation and others who are doing that. So let's just keep giving and reaching out.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And all I would say is, keep encouraging our clients, the philanthropists, to give more and give speedily without too many restrictions, so that the money can get to where it's needed very quickly. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Ceris, for chairing, Eddie and John. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all very much. Remember to join us next week. We'll be going through another one at 4 p.m. on Monday. If you have any suggestions for topics, please do email info@philanthropy-impact.org. And take care. Have a good week. Bye all.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.